The Isla Nublar sunset was a deceptive masterpiece, painting the sky in bruised hues of violet and blood orange that bled into the darkening Pacific. It was a painting that hid the rot beneath the canvas. John Raymond Arnold, known to everyone as Ray, leaned against the rough stucco of the visitor center's rear wall, the gravel crunching softly under his boots. He took a long, slow drag from his cigarette, the cherry glowing like a rogue ember in the encroaching twilight. The smoke plumed from his lips, a ghostly gray ribbon that twisted in the humid island air before being snatched away by the breeze, carrying the scent of orchids and distant, damp earth. He was the chief engineer. He knew the island not as a visitor, but as a complex mix of software, code, and control. He knew the hum of the diesel generators in the power station, the precise voltage running through the perimeter fences, the code that held the whole fragile illusion together. And right now, the hum felt off-key. A low thrum of anxiety vibrated beneath his skin, a sensation that had little to do with the failing fences or any tropical storm. It was a feeling he got when a calculation was wrong, when a variable was introduced that destabilized the entire equation. The heavy steel door behind him groaned open, spilling a rectangle of sterile fluorescent light onto the gravel. Dr. Jerry Harding stepped out of the underground car park that housed the future tour Ford Explorers and park worker Jeeps, pulling the door shut with a solid thud that echoed briefly before being swallowed by the jungle's evening chorus. Jerry looked tired, his face etched with the kind of weariness that came from staring into the eyes of the sick and the broken. He was the park's chief veterinarian, a man whose job was to patch up Hammond's living miracles, a task that was becoming increasingly fraught. "Smoke break, Ray?" Jerry asked, his voice carrying the mild, professional cadence he used for everything, from diagnosing a metatarsal fracture in a gallimimus to discussing the weather. Ray offered a tight smile, the cigarette dangling from the corner of his mouth. "Something like that. Keeps the mosquitoes at bay." He gestured with his head towards the jungle. "How's our girl, the stegosaur?" Jerry sighed, leaning his back against the wall next to Ray, his gaze following the engineers out into the deepening shadows of the paddocks. "She's stable. For now. They're the most susceptible. Whatever this vascular necrosis is, it's targeting the metabolic pathways that process the lysine. I've got her on a high-density supplement regimen, but..." He trailed off, shaking his head slightly. Ray took another drag, letting the silence hang between them for a moment, thick with the unspoken anxieties of their respective duties. "So, have you heard with our Mr. Wu?" Jerry turned his head, his interest piqued by the shift in Ray's tone. It was a subtle change, a drop in pitch that signaled something more than casual complaint. "What about him?" Ray stubbed out his cigarette on the sole of his boot, pocketing the dead filter. He didn't look at Jerry, his eyes fixed on a distant, dark line of trees where the land began to rise towards the island's northern cliffs. "I was up there this morning, past the T-Rex paddock, running diagnostic checks on a new substation grid. Wu was up there with a couple of his techs, looking at the terrain with blueprints. Project X?" Jerry asked. He knew the head geneticist was always working on something new, always pushing the boundaries of the technology. It was a point of professional pride for Wu and a source of constant, low-level anxiety for everyone else. That's what he calls it. But he's not just splicing frog DNA into a velociraptor anymore, Jerry. He told me, in his usual chipper way, that he'd taken a new concept to Hammond, a proof of concept for generational adaptation. He's not resurrecting a dinosaur. Ray finally looked at Jerry, his eyes dark in the fading light. "It's something new." Jerry frowned, his veterinarian's mind immediately jumping to the biological implications. "New? What do you mean?" "Wu's theory," Ray continued, leaning a shoulder against the wall, "is that the existing park inhabitants are too predictable, too bound by their original genetic templates, even with the amphibian DNA fillers. He's been analyzing the behavioral data from the raptor pen, the T-Rex, all of them. He says their lethality is a function of their history. He wants to recreate something of a powerhouse design. It's a predator, too, a cold knot tightened in Jerry's stomach. He had spent the last 24 hours trying to save a stegosaurus from a metabolic disease they didn't fully understand, and now was talking about bringing back a new type of predator. Muldoon knows about this. Ray let out a short, sharp laugh devoid of any humor. That's the best part. Muldoon is pissed. I saw him this morning, cornering Wu by the comms tower. He was apoplectic, kept saying, "You're not playing God. Henry, you're just being bloody reckless." He said Wu was recreating something that they weren't prepared for. Did Wu say what it was? Jerry's voice was low, his professional curiosity warring with a primal sense of dread. He was cryptic. You know how he is. All excited, like a kid with a new toy. He just kept saying it would be an apex predator of unparalleled efficiency. He mentioned its size repeatedly. Said he'd finally solved the square cube law problem that kept the big theropods from being the perfect hunters. Said whatever he's making, it's going to be big. Bigger than the Rex in terms of mass to speed ratio. And it's a predator, not a scavenger, not a herbivore. At full grown, Wu says it'll be 10 meters. Jerry processed this, his mind racing through the ethical and practical nightmare. The T-Rex was a miracle of nature, a force of chaos. To design something worse, to deliberately ramp up the predatory instincts, it was a terrifying prospect. What did Hammond say? Surely John wouldn't just sign off on something like that. Wu said Hammond loved the idea. Ray said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. He called it the next great leap forward. Wu pitched it as the ultimate attraction, the crown jewel of the park. Something so magnificent, so terrifying, that it would redefine our understanding of predation. And Hammond, he bought it. Hook, line, and sinker. You know how he is about his spectacles. Jerry stared out at the darkening landscape, the distant bellow of a Parasaurolophus serving as a melancholy counterpoint to their conversation. It felt like the park was a living organism, and they were discussing a malignant tumor growing within it. Where are they going to put it? We don't have a containment facility built for something like that. The Rex paddock is already at the limits of its design. That's what I was doing up there, Ray said. Who needs a new paddock? Bigger. He said it needs to be placed north of the T-Rex, on the high plateau above the gorge. He told me it requires a large area with a large water source, a semi-aquatic ecosystem. He was talking about needing a water depth of at least 15 meters over a significant portion of the enclosure with deep water hunting zones. Jerry's eyebrows shot up. Aquatic? You mean it's semi-aquatic? Like a Spinosaurus? Wu says no. He says the fossil record for Spinosaurus is too incomplete and its niche was too specialized. He said his creation is a terrestrial ambush predator with aquatic dominance. It uses the water as a medium for stealth and pursuit. He's talking about a filtration system that can handle the waste output of a 6-ton carnivore and a water volume of nearly 50 million gallons. That's not a paddock, Jerry. That's an artificial lake with a cage around it. 6 tons. Jerry's voice was a strained whisper. The T-Rex was estimated to be around 7 or 8 tons, but it was land-based. A 6-ton predator that actively hunted in the water. The implications were staggering. The sheer power, the speed it could generate underwater, the difficulty of containment. What's the genetic basis for this? What animal is he combining to get that? He wouldn't say. Just smiled that calm, detached smile of his, and said he was synthesizing a new biological reality. Ray ran a hand over his tired face. All I know is that Muldoon and his team have to start surveying that land tomorrow. They have to pour a concrete foundation for a facility that will house a monster Wu invented because Hammond wants a bigger show. And Muldoon, I think Muldoon is already measuring the distance between that new paddock and a new comms tower. They stood in silence for a long time, the weight of the new information settling between them. The sky was now a deep, inky black, studded with brilliant stars that seemed mockingly serene. The sounds of the park at night were a complex tapestry of calls, cries, and rustles, a symphony of life that now seemed more ominous. I have to go, Jerry said finally, pushing himself off the wall. I need to check the sediment samples from the 6 stegosaurs enclosure. See if there's a pathogen in the soil or water supply. Have a good night, Ray said. Jerry nodded, a grim understanding passing between the two men. He turned and walked back towards the glowing visitor center, his footsteps crunching on the gravel, his mind already cataloging the physiological requirements of a creature that defied every known evolutionary precedent. He didn't need to see the beast to know the profound danger it represented. He could feel it in the air, a chilling premonition that the true horror of Isla Nublar wasn't what John Hammond had resurrected from the past, but what Henry Wu was so carelessly about to unleash upon the future.